Thanks for joining, everybody. Welcome to this webinar by Codurance. This webinar is, as you can see on the screen, just to make sure you are in the right place. This is going to be a conversation between the three of us around AI's impact on software engineering and kind of cutting through the hype a little bit and sharing some kind of lived stories about us in teams and leading teams around AI and LLMs in IDEs. So we'll begin with some introductions. I'll begin. My name is David Halewood. I am a senior software craftsman. That is me in the picture. I've lost a bit of hair since then, but I assure you it is me. I've been in the tech industry for around about 8 years. I'm currently acting as a tech lead on a client in the ag tech industry. I've also worked across e-commerce and ed tech as well over the years, and previously worn different hats as personal trainer, gym manager. I was just telling my colleagues of my previous history before. So bring a wealth of different experiences along with tech too. Bit of an early adopter with AI, and kind of picked up Cursor as a daily driver around about, it's over a year ago now. So quite early doors. I've got lots of kind of life lessons and good and bad things that I've learned over that time to share with you today, hopefully. Over to my colleagues. Christina, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. Hi everyone. So I'm Christina. I'm sort of been working with Codurance for around 8 years, been in the tech industry like 15. So my kind of like industry experience, it's really varied. I've been in sort of like in finance, in telecoms, in both retail and now more recently just a bit more back to sort of like general back office type working. My experience with AI actually has only started a lot more recently. I was one of the more sort of like reticent adopters, really, of AI. Sort of, I had just had a feeling that it wasn't the right thing for me. But I'm sort of like learning to adapt. And as a tech lead, I'm sort of seeing my team members pick that up a lot more and having to find ways to integrate that properly into sort of like our workflows. Yeah, that's me for now. I'm sure you'll hear more from me later. Go on, Matt.
Brilliant, thank you. Hi everyone, I'm Matt Belcher. I head up emerging technology for Codurance in the UK, and I work a lot with kind of CTOs, engineering leaders. I guess sort of helping them sort of cut through the hype, as the slide says, really, and trying to help them understand how they can best use their data, how they can leverage AI in a way that delivers real business value beyond just the sort of the vibe code you might be hear about on YouTube and LinkedIn posts. So I come from quite a strong tech background. I think I spent probably about 16 years or so now in software consultancy, about 6 with Codurance and about 10 with ThoughtWorks. And I've worn many hats over the years, from kind of hands-on developer to solution architect to CTO. So quite a varied background.
Brilliant. Thanks. Next slide, Matt. Oops. Awesome. So for those of you who aren't sure or aren't aware of who Codurance are, we're a software consultancy. We're deeply rooted in the software craftsmanship movement. Our founders, Sandro and Mash, were very instrumental in kind of raising awareness around software craftsmanship in London, and that's grown out to now kind of a global scale. We are kind of, I would say, keen to work with our clients on software quality using the principles of agile and extreme programming to kind of drive that quality across the industry. That's what we really care about. We've worked with these clients, as you can see on here. We've really grown quite a lot from our roots in London through the UK, Europe, and now across North and South America as well. I'm waiting for the day where we have a hub in the Bahamas, and then maybe I'll put in my transfer request. But growing every day. And you can, reach out for us for more information on Codurance. Fantastic. Next slide, please, Matt. So just some housekeeping and the agenda for today. Please use the questions, and there's a Q&A section in Zoom as well. If you're familiar with it, I'll be keeping an eye on the chat and also the Q&A. And if there's questions that we feel are kind of relevant to the topic that we're talking about at the time, we might bring them in as we go. And if there's other topics that we want to discuss or get to, we do like a Q&A. We'll leave some time at the end to get through them. So hopefully we will get through all of your questions, but please do know that we'll follow up with any questions that we just don't get to for time, or kind of just topics don't really align as well as we would hope. But we'll do that. The session is being recorded, and we'll share it on YouTube after the webinar. if you have any technical issues, please do write in the chat. We have a couple of people working in the background that can help you with those. So just feel free to reach out just generally. And then please, if you don't mind, just in case we've done something wrong with the configuration, just make sure your audio is muted and camera's turned off for now. Thanks very much. And we should be going until around about 11 o'clock, there or thereabouts. So that'll be kind of our cutoff point. Great.
Perfect. So I think before we sort of jump into the main part of today, I wanted to share a little bit of context really behind some of the research that we've been doing at Codurance around AI coding tools. So earlier in the year, we ran a number of events where we had experienced sort of senior engineers come along, and they took on sort of 2 coding challenges, one where they solved the challenge with AI and kind of one old school without AI. We then took all of the code bases that kind of came as a result of those various sessions, both the AI code bases and the non-AI code bases, and done a bunch of analysis internally on the various code bases to see kind of like what was the real impact of using these AI coding tools, and was it a real kind of negative? So was it a real net positive, or like where were the differences? As well as that, around delivery teams, so teams that both Christina and David have been leading, and others, they've been using AI coding tools across our clients, sort of delivering production software by using these AI coding tools. So as part of that, we've also been trying to track the impact that using those tools has been having on their work as well. And they've been sharing back their own successes as well, where things have worked well and things that haven't worked well as well. So that's also been very useful for us. And then finally, we have a number of our own sort of internal products and tools that we've been using AI coding tools against over the past sort of year or so to help us sort of develop, I guess, not just these tools and products, but also kind of like what's working well with these tools, where do they really shine or where do they fall down. So all of those sort of data sources have come together, plus kind of our own experiences, and we've put all of that kind of insight really into our ebook, Beyond the Hype, which you can find on our website. Well worth a read, I think, in terms of giving you a bit of a playbook in terms of how to adopt AI coding tooling in your organization. And that's what's really sort of spurred the conversation today. So we're here today with a little bit of some of our experiences across those 3 elements. And then sort of lastly, if you're really keen to sort of get some support in sort of getting started with your own kind of AI journey, then we have sort of 2 specific offerings around sort of data and AI that are really geared towards helping organizations identify how they can get started with AI, and what are those use cases that kind of really make sense for them, and what are the real sort of business drivers and value behind adopting AI. But also kind of helping organizations to sort of put a real kind of path in and a roadmap for how they can adopt AI in their organization, and whether that's be through kind of assessing what needs to be done to close the gap in terms of being ready for AI, whether that's through data engineering or architecture, or looking at use cases, right the way through to like building working proof of concept applications to kind of validate ideas and support a business case. So there's 2 really good offerings there that I think can help organizations really sort of jumpstart their AI journey. So please get in touch if you want to sort of discuss either of those with us. So I guess we can sort of jump into the main part of today.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks, Matt. So I thought to kind of kick us off and get the conversation flowing, we can start with just a little bit about what have you used so far in your experiences, kind of the use cases and tools that you're seeing, either using yourself or the teams that you're leading using.
So I can kick off on this one. Basically, within my team, there's been a few different things that have been used so far. We've trialed Copilot in general. Our latest daily driver, as sort of like you alluded to, Dave, and your team, is also Cursor. It's something that we've picked up, and I think every single one of like the engineers in my team have really run with. That's been like very good at helping us sort of like the day-to-day work that we're doing, like larger refactorings, that sort of thing. Other tools that have been used, we've been using things like Warp, testing that out as a sort of like just in sort of like in the consoles. And one that I've used more recently, which actually is one of like the ones I found really valuable, is a AI prototyping tool called Lovable. And again, that's been like used really great for helping prompt conversations with our product managers, with our designers. That's been like one of the much more sort of like, well, for me, enlightening tools.
I think for me, a lot of the work that we do with Codurance is around software modernization. So often like the first part of that is we go into an organization and we want to understand the current state of things. And often that involves understanding the architecture and the current software process, kind of how that's put together, the tech involved, the libraries, all those different things. So I think I've seen some quite good successes recently with leveraging Claude Code for that. So that's sort of called a code base comprehension where we're able to run Claude Code over often quite large, complex, fairly old code bases to help us sort of really get up to speed very quickly in terms of where were the areas where we need to think about modernizing sooner rather than later, where the risks might be in terms of libraries that are out of date, and really sort of help us to put together a bit of a sort of modernization roadmap in terms of helping our clients understand where the gaps are that they need to address to then kind of support their business goals. So that's been quite a useful one. I think also that's been evolving quite a bit recently, kind of Claude Code. I know there's now an SDK available for that as well. So one of the things that we're doing internally is kind of building an internal application on top of that to sort of systematize some of the prompts that we've been using to analyze code bases, for example, with tools like Claude Code. So that's been quite a good one for us so far.
Excellent. I think with my story, it's a little bit similar to Christina, really, in terms of the tools and use cases that I've found particularly useful at the moment. So as I said, I was a pretty early adopter with Cursor, and I absolutely loved it at first, but I found it quite worrying how much it would do without constraints. So I've learned a lot about that, which we'll probably talk about later on, about how to provide those constraints for the AI to kind of operate efficiently and safely. But it was just unbelievable what it could do at the time. And I've still used Cursor most of the time for my daily driver. On the current client that we're at, they have a pretty, I would say, strict but open conversation around governance and things like that. So there's some restrictions on what I can use. But with Cursor, the earliest use case that I could find was really rapid prototyping. Christine, I think you mentioned that was a use case that you had as well, in that if I didn't care about the quality of the code afterwards, and my outcome was just in the POC and trying to have a principled conversation with design or product about what I think the product could do, and the code was thrown away straight away, I had every confidence that what I was doing in the ID would be absolutely fine and safe. And I think that was the thing that I thought, this is what AI is going to be the limit of. And over time, that's definitely grown, I think, in terms of the scope of what I think you can safely and efficiently use AI for with your kind of daily coding needs. And since then, I've worked in different IDEs just to get a feel for the different experiences with the kind of JetBrains products and Rider and their offering with VS Code and the different extensions that you can use, like Continue, and you can have Client in there as well now. And also some more kind of self-hosted stuff around the Azure OpenAI, and using LibreChat as kind of a shell around a self-hosted and self-contained IDE where you can share safely your context, because it's all within kind of a container that you house and have control over. It's not offloaded to any external servers, so you can throw all of your proprietary data at it and feel safe about that. So that's actually been really, really useful. I've got a lot about just talking to the data, I think people phrase it as, right? With tools like Databricks as well. So yeah, lots of different kind of things to maybe discuss and dive into during this conversation. With the use cases that we've discussed so far, do we have any like real experiences to share, kind of success story as well?
So I think I can speak to the prototyping one a bit because that was actually a fairly recent journey for us. What we were finding actually was that designs would take a long time. Designs in general, we've quite a lot of developers and a very small number of sort of designers. And from sort of like inception, so the ideation side or the product managers are saying like, this is what I think I want, to like engineers execution, that sort of time frame was taking quite a long time. And we were ending up with like this sort of like process of like building up high fidelity designs and going all the way through to the end of that and then having to iterate on that. So that process in itself takes a long time. And then to find out that actually this one aspect people didn't like has to go back to the drawing board, takes so long to sort of like move on from there. Lovable was really interesting actually, because what we were able to do, what our designers were able to do, especially this is I think what was really powerful in it, is that it was a tool that was able to be used not just by us but by our designers and our product managers. Is they were able to take everything from Figma and just like pump it into Lovable. We had a design system, we had all of this work, and they could just say like, hey, this is the kind of concept I want. This is, like I would like it if we could have a button on the top right that shows, how many things you liked or something weird like that, right? And it would just immediately put that up there, give you an interaction that you described, and let you iterate on that interaction. So for really low cost, we were being able to have conversations about something concrete that we were actually able to visualize. And that was really powerful for us as developers, because what we were getting as well was like value statements from the product managers. And we could say like, actually, we can deliver that value to you in a much simpler way. So we're bypassing the whole product cycle. We could say like, hey, what if we tried this? And again, talk to Lovable, say like, hey, actually, we want to provide this shortened sort of mechanism to provide the same value, and then show that interaction back to the product managers for them to turn around and say, hey, actually, that's a lot simpler, right, for us in terms of our implementation. So development time, it's a lower cost to value. And they were able to say, actually, do you know what? We didn't think of that. That's absolutely fine for what we need. So yeah, that I think is sort of like a game changer really, in terms of like the speed of getting through those early iterations, and then just being able to go, okay, now designers focus on high fidelity after getting through all of that.
Yes, that's super interesting. And my first reaction to that was, how did the designers and the product managers or anybody working in that kind of discovery space feel about that? And you kind of explained that they were really on board with it because they saw the value in it. Was there any difficulty in that conversation at all?
There was some reticence, I think, from design, because in the initial states, this was something that was led by the product and the design team. They needed to get prototypes to us faster. They needed to deliver designs to us faster. So they were running it, and eventually, like engineering were like, "Hey, can we jump in here as well?" And there was some reticence, I think, to that, but ultimately, I think there's sort of like internal conversations for us to have. None of us ever have the desire to turn into full designers, but we can. We still need that stage regardless, right? But this is just like a quick sort of journey towards that.
Hmm. Yeah, it resonates with me a little bit because I have a similar story in that I wasn't using Lovable or necessarily getting value statements, just something I'd either noticed in the application or an opportunity that I saw in the data that we could kind of serve to and just do a quick POC and spin it up in a video into the product channels. And there was something that was picked up on by kind of senior leadership that bypassed design team, and it got brought into the sprint kind of very, very quickly. And the designers, like secretly, I know because they told me, do not like the design of it at all, but it served the purpose that the business kind of valued. So I think it is a delicate balance, and I really like that you kind of worked very directly with them. Whereas I think in my experience, I might have circumnavigate them indirectly. So I think it's just another tool to have principled conversations, I think, to drive quicker iterations. So.
We have one client as well where they started off with quite a low test coverage, and often like writing tests for a code base that wasn't test driven is quite a hard thing to do, but also B, quite a time consuming thing to do, right? And so the team looked at, okay, well, can we leverage some AI tooling here to help us increase the code coverage? And it turns out that they did. And that was quite a successful thing for them to be able to do. So before they were making large scale changes in a particular area that had low test coverage, they were using tools like Cursor, I think, to tell them what that part of the code was doing, kind of functionality, document it, and then kind of use that to craft prompts to generate tests for that functionality. And then they could write those tests, make sure that they were running correctly, and then that then getting the safety net then to sort of do refactoring or kind of make changes. That was quite a good use case for them in terms of quite rapidly increasing test coverage on a code base that had quite low test coverage. But I think probably one of my favorite stories that we have at Codurance so far is probably from your team, Christina, another one of yours, where you and your team migrated some of the front end code.
Yeah. So actually, so to that point, yeah, we had a design system almost before we had an application in our team. So when I joined, there was a lot of like technical decisions that had already been made, and one of those was to use Radix as the base component library. But actually, the kind of wants and needs of our design team were quite vast and quite large, which required a lot of like hairy modifications to sort of like the base components of Radix and the way that Radix would work. And what we found was that every single story we were sort of like hitting sort of like a wall of like, okay, this in order to make this work the way that it's is wanted to work, we were going to have to do so much extra. And that was just slowing down delivery. It was slowing down delivery to such a point that we had kind of kept bashing our heads against this, and eventually it kind of came to a like sort of come to Jesus moment, or whatever you want to call it, where we had to have this big discussion with product design and say like, this is just not suitable for purpose. We need to look at something else. We then had to sort of like focus on pivoting. That pivot was a sort of actually, I think a lot of AI was used in part of this as well, was trying to like figure out a few different prototypes using different component libraries to say like, hey, which one gets us closest to the intent of what design are wanting, right? And that led us to a decision to take up Mantine. I think Mantine was one of the libraries that the designers were most happy with, that the tech team sort of like within the realms of like what we could choose were happy with. This was like a good compromising like compromise decision for all of us. So we now have a bunch of work and an entire design system that's been written in using Radix components, and we want to shift that to Mantine. Now we know how long it's taken to build this already. It's taken a long time. So we're looking at sort of like 1 or 2 months work, possibly more, right? Just trying to redo what we did. It's taken this long to build this component library. 2 of our engineers undertook this work, and we said, hey, let's try using AI. Let's try and leverage AI to help us do this, sort of like just component by component, change these and upgrade them. And yeah, this was done, and essentially in a sort of like less than a week or so, I think maybe a week and a half, we had shifted the entire design system over from using Radix to using Mantine. And it wasn't perfect. I think ultimately we maybe had like 1 bug report come up out of it, but considering the time saving, the cost in like hours that we had of like people having to do this work, that was monumental. That 1 bug was ultimately worth it, right? For the fact that we were able to shift. And after that, we just sped up development as well, just because of the simple fact of not having to work with Radix anymore.
That's really cool. I think that's a really good use case, like this translation of languages or frameworks. And one thing I've noticed because we went through something similar from changing from .NET to TypeScript, where we found it quite useful, but also with a really well documented ORM versus a less documented ORM. Obviously, the LLMs are much more informed about that framework and technology, so it can more easily translate your requirements because it's got the training data from the documentation, or if it's connected to a web browser, it can find it very easily. And I think that a lot of newer frameworks are cottoning on to that and have very easily readable by machines documentation that may be less readable by humans, but that's not their audience anymore. It's kind of for training data purposes. So I think that that's a really interesting shift, I think. And it was a real marked difference between the quality of responses from prompts for the less well-documented ORM and the one that we kind of moved to. And that again sped up development a lot. So yeah, I think we'll see a little bit more of that, I think. Pretty cool.
Sorry, I just wondered if we should look at some of these questions. I just realized the chat's going off.
A lot of them are pretty relevant, actually,
Yeah.
to what we were talking about. So I think it'd be good to bring them in. I noticed one from Steve, and I think Paige is involved in that conversation as well, around if we're doing POCs and things like that, how easy is it to have the conversation with product that this isn't production ready? This is an age-old problem, I think, isn't it, with POCs, regardless as to whether LLMs have generated it, is that they're meant to be burnt with fire and then rebuilt properly with software quality built in from the start. But
Yeah, I think perhaps one of the dangers of, so I think it's great now that we have tools like Lovable and Bolt.new and others where the bar to creating an application is a little bit lower, in the fact that you don't have to be so technical anymore. You can use prompts, and before you know where you are, you've got an application that works. I think the danger is there that they kind of find their way into production by sort of various routes, and before you know where you are, you've got kind of this myriad of different applications that were kind of built through these tools that aren't kind of production ready, that aren't hardened, that weren't test driven, that perhaps don't scale, and all those other things. So I think it probably goes around to the conversation of governance and those kind of things and policies. I think if you're going to roll out these tools to your organization, I think you need to be very clear on what the route is for getting these sort of applications into production, and what you're prepared to support as an engineering organization in production. There should be a set of principles almost that guard you against accepting low quality applications going into production for a long period of time. So I think using tools like Lovable and Bolt.new, absolutely great, but they're very much in that kind of prototyping POC discussion. I think they need to be careful framing around how they're introduced to an organization as well.
Yeah, I think with Lovable it was a really simple thing because it was so far removed from the development process itself that it was more sort of like, for us, we just took inputs and then which was our design system, which was in Figma. So it's like sort of like not actually in development, and then spat that into Lovable, and then that could spit out design. And actually it could create new components and that sort of stuff, and it could spit that back out into Figma, which the designers I think did do, and they were able to iterate on those designs right from Figma, but never touching code. And I think to the point of like, when do we allow that to sort of like carry on? I think we don't. We just sort of say like that, like with the proof of concept, exactly like you said, David, we burn it afterwards, right? After that, we can still use AI. We can still use AI to build out the actual implementation of things, but now we are doing it with intent, right? We're not sort of like in the vibey world of like, hey, I kind of want this thing, go make it, and then iterating it through it via conversation with an AI, where it's all actually saying like, hey, this is the exact behavior I want written via your tests or whatever, and this is what I want. So you're now building this thing using your relevant software practices, not just sort of like out of your hands in the hands of a AI tool.
Mhm. Yeah, definitely. I think to point to Tim's comment there as well about the intentionality around this low fidelity prototyping, I think that was potentially a part of I don't see it necessarily as a problem that I mentioned earlier around the kind of difficulty that the design team didn't approve or like the design. It didn't match what they would have done necessarily, but it solved a user problem. I think it's still an interesting conversation to have. That potentially my POC at the time was too high fidelity, in that the expectation for the product was like, we're going to bring this in the next sprint. So there's potentially a balance there, but I still think it's possible to leverage more kind of high level. I did that POC within the IDE that's very aware of the code context, and I was more pair programming than acting as a maybe an EM or a product manager and just saying, here's what we want, and we're judging the quality based on the behavior rather than the implementation. It was a little bit more high fidelity than that, but still not enough for it really to be production ready. It had to still go through the software delivery lifecycle with all of the quality checks and things like that. But the feedback loop was maybe a little smaller, but it was also a very small feature as opposed to like solving a larger problem. So I think it'll always be a balance on that spectrum for sure.
I think it's like classic thing where if someone sees a like really polished UI, they think, oh, that's it. The application's fully complete. Let's ship it. So I think that's kind of an education piece around it, which communicates the fact that this isn't production ready, despite the fact that the UI might look lovely and kind of quite polished. It's not set up for production. It's not connected to other systems in their organization. It perhaps isn't scalable. The data behind it is maybe canned or fake data to show the use case of. So I think an education piece around some of these tools as well.
100%. I'm just looking through some of the more the questions. Adam there's asked around running through processes on developing specs and agent steering documents. I think that was something that we definitely wanted to get to at some point. But we could talk about that. I mentioned earlier around some of the constraints provided to the LLMs that they can operate kind of safely and efficiently. One of the things that I learned really early on was specifically within Cursor, but this is now across all toolings. I think one of the memes out there at the moment is the dot files for AI and LLMs and IDEs is getting as long as the node modules recursiveness. But I think it's really important because those constraints are what allow you to have confidence that the LLMs are going to behave kind of in pseudo review in some ways. And they can actually learn how you develop as well and start to provide responses that are a bit more akin to how you would code. And you can use that through, in Cursor, it's something called a rules markdown. In other IDEs, it's instructions or whatever. But you can provide it with a list of ways to operate. You can give it your contributing markdown or your developer guidelines. It can obviously learn from the linting files and prettier files, things like that, how to format the code. But it's more about kind of what it's providing in terms of software quality, its actions it's taking. Does it plan first? Does it build tests and then show you that the tests are there before they start writing any implementation? You can provide all of these instructions. And one thing I've noticed is if I see something over time that it's doing more regularly that I like, I can say, please add this. It can add it to its own instruction files, which is pretty cool. Or if there's a way that I would like to start implementing a new pattern or strategy to the code to improve quality, then I'll teach it that and tell it to use that in this kind of similar scenario in the future, and it'll recommend those. And it can do that on a project basis. So the person that I'm pairing with, the next time that they go and work on something, they will also get a similar prompt. So it can grow and evolve over time, which I really think brings in a lot more confidence that it's operating in a way that you would be comfortable with if you were writing the code and you were applying your own practices. That's not to say I would ever give it free constraint. I'm still very much a fan of the practices and principles that I believe in around TDD. I think that's a great friend of LLMs and getting software quality. I would write the tests. If it's as simple as a new field on a very given API or interface that's very well established, I think that it gives a little bit more freedom. But certainly with new features, I would write the tests myself first and then pair with the LLM. Does anyone else have experience with that? The kind of
I think it's probably somewhat similar to the vibe coding argument. I think agentic AI is obviously very powerful and great, but I think there's a lot of guardrails that you need with it, particularly in the coding space. Because I think a lot of code can get churned out by these tools that on the face of it looks quite plausible and acceptable. But the rate of the code that gets produced, I think, is quite quickly kind of gets to the point where you lose the the sense of what's right and what's wrong in terms of like good design and good principles and aligning to your overall architecture, that you fall into the habit of just saying accept all, and before you know where you are, you've lost control of the overall design. And I think it's critical that I think as software engineers we maintain that hand on the steering wheel in terms of software design, architecture, clean code, all these things that we've shown as kind of crucial practices. I think the danger is to sort of forget about those in favor of AI. I think they have to remain, and it's kind of, okay, well, how does AI sit alongside these things? So I think that's a thing that I think is still kind of forming a little bit in terms of workflows and patterns. Although we've had a few across Codurance where we've tried a few things, but I'm still quite cautious around agentic AI coding tools for most use cases, just because I think there's an awful lot that can go wrong. And if we're not careful, I think you quite quickly lose control of your overall design and code quality. Particularly, I think we all know that you end up reading more code and maintaining code than you do writing code. So it's vitally important that your team understands the code that's being written and kind of why it's written that way, and be able to spot potential mistakes and errors and bugs in the code. If you're kind of handing over that control fully to an AI agent in an agentic mode, I think you quite quickly lose that control.
Yeah, I find the blast radius can get quite large from using AI, because often he'll be like sort of, okay, I just want this small change, and he'll become really opinionated. Is learning from all the sources on the online or whatever that it's consumed, and it will say, well, other people who've tried to do this have also done this, this, and this. So all of a sudden, your one small change that you wanted comes along with so much more stuff, which is, I think, to the point of constraints, is really important. But actually, for your peers, it can be really difficult, because what will happen is that, and I don't know how everyone else reads the merge request, but the way that I tend to read a merge request is I try to understand what the person was thinking at each point in time as they were sort of like building something. So my general process will be, okay, let's go see their first commit. What was the second thing? And then what did they try and build? And that's how I generally would read that. But what I find is that when AI has come into play, a lot of the times that first commit could be so many lines long, and I just don't have. I mean, maybe I'm just being a bit simple here, but I just don't have the capacity to consume sort of like a 500-line code change in a singular commit. That's too much for me. So then I'm sort of like, okay, that they've obviously used AI. They might have gone too far. So then it's like, okay, we need to encourage you to, one, be very constrained in your use of AI, put those limits on there, be very specific about exactly what it is that you're trying to change and what you're trying to achieve. And yes, AI can help you do that a little bit more quickly, but don't let it just run away. Don't code more than you intended to, right? We know we've got our standard practices in TDD, like the red green refactor cycle, that intends for us to have small commits, small sets of changes. AI shouldn't be breaking that. AI shouldn't be making a much bigger change just because it can. And oh, look, it fast forwarded me through all my error handling. That might give you a really false sense of confidence. Oh, well, it's done the error handling for me. We're good, right? But actually, it's not. It doesn't know your business. It doesn't know the things that you're trying to achieve. And you might actually be missing out on really important things because you're letting it run away from you.
100%. That resonates with me a little bit with working with and I wouldn't even say just more junior engineers. This is across the board. I think as soon as you get AI in your hands or LLM in your hands, I think it's quite easy, and not necessarily a slippery slope, but it's quite easy to start offloading a lot of cognitive load, and more, and you become less of a driver in the pairing situation and more of just a navigator, just watching the lines fly by. And I think you really have to just continue to apply, your professionalism and the principles and practices that you've been applying for many, many years before this came along, and just see it as another pairing partner. And I think the conversation I've had a lot with the more juniors is seeing it as somebody to learn from. Right? Like, imagine it's a more senior engineer that doesn't have the same context that you have with the application. So make sure you quiz it and ask questions, and don't commit anything you don't understand. I remember the first PR I saw when we started to use AIs more generally in the team, and it was similar to what you say. Lots of changes in the code that didn't necessarily correlate exactly to the specification. And also when quizzed in the PR around, like, why did you make this choice? It was difficult for them to articulate because, again, they'd offloaded that cognitive load. So it's a coaching opportunity, I think, there to make sure that we're understanding everything that we ship, preferably before we ship it or put a merge request in. But yeah, it's improved a lot, I think, over the time working with the LLMs. But yeah.
Across your teams then, David, Christina, are there principles, techniques, patterns that you've done with your teams to handle that case or minimize those really bulky, large merge requests that are leveraging AI tooling?
I have to admit, David did a really great internal video on this, by the way, and it's something that I sort of harnessed and shared to my teams. I think, Dave, you're probably the best to speak on this because that's basically what I shared to my group.
Was it? Okay, interesting.
Yeah.
I forget which one it was. I've done a few of them now, but yeah, I've worked quite closely with engineers because I believe that there's a real benefit to using LLMs as a pairing partner in terms of delivery time and reducing efficiency, increasing efficiency and reducing friction, I think, a lot of the time, especially in a code base that is large, potentially legacy, potentially with less test coverage. But you really have to be disciplined with it. And the videos and the workshops and the lunch and learns that I've tried to do with the engineers in my team and across the organization is just showcasing that workflow of providing the constraints. I'm a huge fan of TDD. It's never going to go away for me. And I think that the outside in technique is very, very good because you're the one defining the contract, right? The outside contract with what your expected behavior is going to be, hopefully akin to the specification. And then from there, you can start delving deeper and deeper into the implementation and checking at every point. So the instructions that I have to the IDE are that it will make no changes until I give it permission to. I'm aware of the agentic mode. I haven't yet found a strong use case for that I feel comfortable with. There's some people that in the chat I think are suggesting ways in which you could do that, which might be worth exploring. But for now, for me, it's very much acting as that kind of pair programmer rather than a product manager with the code. And it's building in things like, don't make a change until you've written the test. I'll find the test, write the implementation for the test, step by step, only implement one thing at a time. And if there's ever anything that I'm unsure about what it's doing or why it's doing it, or whether it's the most performant way of doing it, because often it'll just give you the quickest solution to make the test pass, as we would with red-green refactor, and then asking it, I think Tim mentioned earlier in the Q&A section around, do you interact with the IDE to get different patterns or strategies for how to apply the code? And I'll do that too as part of that flow once I've got the test passing, just checking if it is the most performant and seeing if there are any other strategies or patterns across the code base that I might not be aware of. Again, it's a large code base that solve this problem in a similar way. Is there a common service that I can use or a util? And it's very good at surfacing that just about quicker than I can with the shortcuts in the IDE. So I find that really kind of reduces the friction and just the yak shaving that you need to do the work that you need to do. I think AI is very, very good at that, and leave the kind of the cognitive load, I think, to us as much as possible.
There's quite a lot of talk and debate and a little bit of hype perhaps around where will the future of AI coding be, and kind of will AI take away the sort of software engineering role? I think your point is important because I think actually there'll be more importance placed on those engineers that are good architects and that can really design a good system well and architect it well and spot where the design's going off course and apply business context to design the right solution. All those kinds of things that I think are going to become even more important now as we look to augment AI tooling into our software development workflows. So I think that critical skill is going to be even more important going forward.
Definitely. Christina, you are muted. Sorry. Classic.
Ah, great. Typical. Yeah, that's actually a really interesting one. Like what does the future look like with AI? And I do think that actually good engineers are going to become, like you said, Matt, more and more important as we go on. I don't know if if you see like sort of startups, a startup will run really, really fast, and you'll get loads and loads of like engineers on it. Some different levels of seniority, but you'll end up with a big code base that eventually you need to bring in experts to help you make sense of, right? Let's not, well, let's say quite modernize, but let's like increase the robustness of this application. Let's put in the right layers and architecture and everything to ensure that it can actually scale appropriately. And I think with AI, we can jumpstart applications so much faster. And you see this, right? We see that we have like companies that are coming up from a single non-technical founder that somehow vibe coded his way through building an entire application service, got 1,000 customers, and then got hacked. The actual engineers now are going to become so much more important to be able to get those sort of businesses to be robust. And if you are using AI, then we can leverage those, again, the exact same engineers as people who know exactly how to architect systems well and safely, to actually build these things a little faster, right? So yeah, I don't think the role of the engineer is ever going to disappear from here. I think if anything, AI probably is going to spin up a bunch of opportunities from us, from the myriad of startups that have come up in the last year alone.
I also think as well that there's also quite a lot of spotlight on using AI for coding and software development as a way of just trying to write code faster. But I think that's not really the right way to look at it. I think if you sort of look at the SDLC kind of its entirety in the place of a systems thinking approach to it, actually the writing code part of it has never really been the bottleneck, right? And so it's not really about just kind of writing more code as fast as we can. I mean, let's say that you can kind of write code now blisteringly fast. Can your product folks kind of build requirements fast enough? Can you test it fast enough? Can you deploy fast enough? Can you keep up with that rapid kind of rate of change and rate of churn? And do you really need that rapidness? I think there's a fair bit of focus on that, just the coding side of AI tooling, when really I think there's a lot of value in thinking beyond just the coding side of things. So how do you leverage AI for testing and for requirements capture and all those other things, like holistically thinking about the SDLC beyond just coding?
You've made the point exactly that I was going to make, but at a wider scale and with more articulation, I'm sure. I think I was really thinking about this, and the point that Steve made, and I think Tim did in one of the Q&As as well, is around, like, are we measuring just delivery time as a success of IDEs with LLMs specifically? But I think it's really important to not emphasize that, especially with the more junior engineers, as Steve pointed out, is that's not the success metric, right? Getting this done faster, I think, is a byproduct of if you're getting quality baked in with your fulfilling the requirements successfully, is great and worthwhile measuring, I think. But more importantly to measure, as Tim points out, is the kind of the systemic monitoring of your systems, and more important than ever, I think, to have very kind of mature observability in your system. So if you're introducing LLMs into your workflows, that they're not detrimental to the quality. And then also, I think that more and more these systems of observability are going to be baking AI into how they like surface and distribute your traces and observability and things like that. I've noticed that already with things like Sentry and Honeycomb, and getting a little bit more smart with how they're surfacing the health of your system. So I think the point goes much beyond just working in your IDE and doing things faster and reducing yak shaving, which is what I mentioned earlier. Those things I think are good for our quality of life and also for the product, but it's a much wider conversation, I think. And I think the explosion of LLMs and IDEs has caused that already. It's a wide spectrum between something like Devon that's you give requirements and it just builds stuff on its own and is acting as a developer in your team, as opposed to you being the kind of pair programmer with the LLM in the IDE. Kind of that spectrum is quite wide, and I imagine that's just going to get wider and wider.
Yeah, it's really interesting because I think the only point that we've spoken to about like the use of AI, it has been very much on the tech side. I think maybe a little bit with the design and the product, but actually, like, where can we use it to help us before that? And I guess it's really great, isn't it? I like consuming vast amounts of information, so it must be able to help us with our research stages and all of that, that are a bit more removed from our sort of day to day, and a bit more on the product research, UX, whatever other areas of the business.
For sure. Just looking at some of the questions here. If there's anything we haven't covered. So there's lots of great questions from Tim. I've been referencing you through this entire thing, so thanks very much, Tim. One of the questions there towards the end is around, I believe you're doing branched development and individual assignments rather than kind of teaming and trunk-based. I think for me to kind of answer that, yes, for the most part. Teaming is something that I think that we do a little bit of on the client. I've done it before as well, whether it's called kind of team programming or crowding, of mobbing, lots of different kind of verbiage around that. But yeah, that's something that we do a fair amount, and I've not really used an LLM to help with that situation, I think, because I think the true value is in the diverse kind of recourse between the people. With pair programming, again, I think similar, not used it too much unless there's either a gnarly bug or we want to apply a new strategy or pattern, or again, finding services and utils that exist that can solve the problem. But yeah, very much with my experience is around branch development at the moment. So if anyone's got any other experience with trunk-based.
You know, I think me personally, I tend to kind of veer towards, where possible, trunk-based development. Spent a lot of my career working in trunk-based development with teams, but I think that also demands a fairly high level of engineering maturity and practices and code-based design to support that. So often there's kind of a path that we take we might not start with trunk-based development out of the box until we've got the engineering practices in a good place, and the process is kind of around that to allow that to be done much more safely. But I think my kind of personal preference would be trunk-based development, but I think we don't tend to dictate that across Codurance. I think it really depends on the situation and the team.
Yeah, I don't really have much to add. I think vast majority of the time I'm similar to David. We're working on branches. The current team that we're working on, we're like sort of trying to get towards trunk-based by encouraging sort of like small lived feature branches. That's like sort of like trying to get people into the practice of those small merges, and then we can have that confidence to say, like, go to small commits. But yeah, sort of on a journey towards that, but not quite on it.
One thing I get asked quite a lot is which IDE should I use and which tool should I use, and how do I keep up with all the myriad of different model changes and tooling changes, right? I don't know how if both of you get the same questions from your teams and people around you, but one of my kind of recommendations on this has been to pick an IDE or pick a tool and get really good at that tool. Because I think the models underneath them will come and go and evolve, but the tools themselves are kind of here to stay. I actually think that over time, the IDEs will kind of converge anyway around the sort of common set of user experiences and features. And if you kind of already start to see a little bit of that now. So I think there's value, as always has been, really, in kind of learning your tool and becoming an expert in your tool. So whether it's Cursor, okay, we'll go ahead and learn Cursor really well, become an expert, know all the AI features available, know all the shortcuts, because I think that's where the value is. And I think the underlying models themselves will come and go and evolve. I think early part of the year, I was saying to our teams, I really recommend using Claude Sonnet 3.7 as like the coding model. now that's already kind of out of date. Everyone's Claude 4, so that will kind of constantly evolve, and there'll probably be a time, I'm sure, where the benchmark suggests that about a better model is more performant for software development tasks. So I think that's like just keeping abreast of the kind of the model updates is important, but I'd focus a lot more on the tooling.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think, as I said, I was an early adopter with Cursor. I do often trial other IDEs just to see if it is something that is worth the shift. But the muscle memory with Cursor at this point is really strong. I think I would have to spend some time, I think, to get as good or as efficient with other tools. But I do see value in still continuing to trial. With personal projects, I'm building an app at the moment for my upcoming wedding, and I'm using very much vibe coding and one of the offerings, bold.new, on purpose, right? I'm purposely trying to act in the way that I think some people shouldn't, just to see what the quality is, right? And I'm having a very difficult time, but I'm forcing myself into that non-role as an engineer to see what product I can come up with. And I think that teaches me more, and how I can have more principled conversations with people that do that to help them, or at least understand more about the value that they're getting out of it. So I agree with you, but I still recommend maybe trialing some of the other tools that are out there as well, because one might come along. I think the advancements that are coming are probably more in the frameworks and tools around the models. The models are going to get increasingly better within the constraints that they have right now. I think that the more advancements are going to come around the frameworks and tools that leverage them. Alrighty. I think we might be there. If there's any other questions outside and that you feel you want to answer before we wrap up.
I think there's probably more questions than we have time to answer, so perhaps we can kind of answer them offline and publish some answers on our website in the coming weeks or so.
Fantastic. Okay, well, just to thank everybody for coming, and thank you very much for joining and for being so kind of interactive with each other, and also the questions really helped us drive hopefully a good conversation. As I mentioned earlier, this will be up on YouTube shortly. You'll be able to find it. If you want any more information about this topic or Codurance, please do reach out, and do keep an eye out for that, the ebook as well. Thanks all.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks all. Take care. Bye-bye.